All right. I see the notification. We're streaming now, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to call to order and announce a quorum is present. Madam Secretary, a quorum is present.
Yes.
Moving to item B, invocation and pledge of allegiance by Council Member James Singleton.
Part of me that I don't actually remember which one's first.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
The prayers first.
Usually prayer, yeah.
Okay. Well, then let us pray. Lord, thank you for your provision and being our rock. The past few months have been unique, have presented unique challenges that have caused stress, anxiety, sickness, and death. Thank you for being one that we can trust to provide us stability and hope. Tonight, we as city leaders will be discussing city business and make decisions that have great impact. I pray that you continue to guide us into your will and provide wisdom. Thank you for your grace. In your name, amen.
Amen.
And then the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the
Flag
flag of the United
United
States
States of America
and
and
to the republic
for which it stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under God, indivisible,
under
with
God,
liberty and justice for
indivisible,
all.
with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Moving to item C, election matters, issuance of certificate of election to newly elected officials and administer oath of office to elected officials. Lori Cuddy, City Secretary.
Yes, so if I can have the newly elected council members raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name.
I, James Singleton.
Gary and Drew, you're muted. You need to unmute.
I, Gary Horst.
I, Drew Wasson.
Do solemnly swear or affirm
Do
solemnly swear or affirm
that I will faithfully execute
that I will faithfully execute
the duties of the office,
the
the
duties
duties
of the office.
council member, place,
Council member.
Council member, place one,
Council member, place 4.
okay, for the City of Jersey Village,
for the city of
Village.
Jersey
Village,
state of Texas,
State of
of
Texas.
and will, to the best of my ability,
And will to
And
the
will
best
to the best of my
ability,
preserve, protect, and defend
preserve, protect, and defend
defend
the Constitution and laws
the
Constitution
Constitution
and laws
of the United States
of the
of
of the
United
United
States.
States
and of this state.
and
And
of
and
the
of the
state.
state.
So help me God.
So
So
help
help
me
me
God.
God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Normally this would be the time where we break for cookies and punch, but we owe you guys some cookies and punch when we all are able to see each other again. Congratulations, guys.
In the fire service, firsts are celebrated by cake and ice cream. And that's the first time I've ever been sworn in over the internet. So
that was very unique, I think, for everybody. That was interesting. All right, going to move on to item D, citizen comments. Any person who desires to address City Council regarding an item on the agenda will be heard at this time in compliance with the Texas Open Meetings Act. Unless the subject matter of the comment is on the agenda, the city staff and council members are not allowed to discuss the subject. Each person is limited to 5 minutes for comments to the City Council. Madam Secretary, do we have any public comments?
Yes, we do. We'll move forward with Frank Marr.
Okay. Go ahead, Frank. There he is.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
No.
Yes.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Frank.
My name is Frank Moore. I live at 16514 St. Hilliard. I've been a member of the Jersey Village Fire Department for 46 years. I'm here tonight to tell you we are having a hard time properly and safely manning our trucks. The time has come for us to look at supplementing, and I want to highlight that word, supplementing our volunteers with more paid personnel. I'm not advocating doing away with the volunteers, but we need some help there. You are faced with two problems. Number one, manning, and number two, how do we pay for it? I've spoken with the mayor, city council, city manager, and the fire chief about this problem. I'll be here listening in at any time if it's possible. I'd be willing to answer questions about the agenda item that you discussed tonight. I just want to go on record, let the city record show that I am in support of hiring more paid personnel to supplement the volunteers that we have today. Our volunteers are a dedicated group, but we're an aging group, and we don't have any new people lined up to come in and replace those that need to be replaced. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Frank. Madam Secretary, do we have any other public comments?
Yes, Mark Malloy.
Okay, Mark.
Hi, my name's Mark Malloy, live at 7803 Hamilton Circle, past city council member for the city of Jersey Village, Texas. Citizens comments for the 05/11/2020 city council meeting. Please make my verbal comments, and I'm probably going to give Lori a written document of my comments and make that a permanent record of the meeting. And so basically the first thing I want to talk about is regular session agenda item 3, which is an ordinance to allow citizens or the city to consider allowing citizens to have poultry in their backyards. And basically I feel that Gary Wubenhorst and Greg Holden and Drew Watson recuse themselves from voting on that issue because they live in Wyndham Village, and that area has its own homeowners association. So basically what ends up happening is they vote on that issue, and their homeowners association adds a rule saying that they will not allow poultry to be raised in Wyndham Village. Then they will not be affected by their vote of saying, yes, we are going to allow poultry to be, held by the citizens that want poultry. And so anyway, basically that was the first thing. And then the second thing is, I'm seeing that basically what I want to say is the Jersey Village taxpayers are the ones paying for the golf course because it does not generate the needed revenue to pay for itself. The Jersey Village taxpayers have been paying for the golf course ever since the city government decided to purchase it in the year 1999 to 2000. The current golf course fund is a negative $4,705,048.96. This means the money to pay for the golf course fund deficit had to come from other city revenue sources. The city government does not count the principal and interest payments of the original purchase of the golf course as an operating expense to the golf course. The original purchase price was an estimated $7 million, and the interest payments over the 25-year loan period is an estimated $5,793,114. The total of the principal and interest payments are $12,793,114. So the golf course negative fund balance plus the principal and interest debt service payments come to a total amount of $498,163. This amount of money is just part of the total golf course cost to the citizens of Jersey Village, Texas. The city is using capital improvements fund money to pay for things they want to do to the golf course that are also not counted as an operating expense of the golf course. The city government is planning on spending $3.9 million on a new golf course clubhouse convention center, another estimated $1 million on a new parking lot for the facility, and an estimated $800,000 on a treated wastewater supplemental irrigation system for the golf course. So the added up total of money to be spent on the golf course will come to $24,996,326. This amount of money I'm stating is most likely not including other city revenue and taxpayer money that also has been or will be spent on the golf course should the taxpayers of Jersey Village, Texas be forced to pay for a municipal golf course. So basically that's my citizens' comments for this meeting.
All right, thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Bye.
Lori, do we have any other public comments?
Yes, Marilee Beasley.
She does not appear to be here, at least not with the number that she gave us originally. I know she did email the council a little bit ago
I
stating.
got an email from her. Okay. Any other public comments, Lori?
No.
I'm going to move on to item E, city manager report. Does any city council members have any questions for Austin? I did have a question about maybe the plan to reopen parks. What are some of the things that we're thinking about easing restrictions? What are some of the things that we're talking about? I know most parks, that's kind of a misconception. Most of the parks are open. It's the play places that are sort of restricted. And that includes all of Carol Fox Park because it's just got a gigantic places and kids touching things, the touch points, the gates, the doorknobs on those is difficult to properly sanitize. So that was the original reason behind. But has there been any thought to reopening the parks at any point?
We're definitely looking at when we might be able to do that. We are anticipating the governor to issue another executive order or more guidance at a minimum this week as to what can and cannot be opened. So we're kind of waiting for the governor's information to come out this week before we make any final decisions as to how we might reopen the playgrounds. But when we do, we'll be sure to put that out on our website and promote that via social media as well.
Okay, great. Looking forward to it. Any other questions for Austin? Okay, gonna move on to the consent agenda. Is there any item on the consent agenda that a council member would like to see moved to the regular session? Seeing none, I'm looking for a motion on the consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Got a motion from Bobby and a second from Gary. And I will go through with a roll call vote. State yay or nay. Councilmember Wasson, state your vote.
Yay.
Councilmember Warren, state your vote.
Aye.
Councilmember Singleton, state your vote.
Aye.
Councilmember Wilmenhorst, state your vote.
Yay.
Councilmember Holden, you're muted, but.
Aye.
Okay. All right, motion passes. Move on to regular session. Item number 1, consider ordinance number 2020-11, continuing the mayoral declaration of local disaster due to public health emergency. Austin Blees, city manager.
Mayor and councilors, this ordinance would extend our current declaration of the local disaster. It would expire on July 21st, which is 2 months from now, or if the governor cancels all of the related COVID-19 orders, declarations, restrictions, and regulations. The council is scheduled to meet on July 20th, and the council could choose to extend the order at that point in time. This order is very similar to the one we approved in March, but it recognizes and incorporates by reference the governor's executive orders and defers to them where there's any conflict between the two.
Okay. Any questions for Austin?
Austin,
Yes, sir.
the order calls for quarantining people. Who has responsibility for them, us or the state? They need to eat.
Sure.
What?
So quarantining, it's a local county issue as well. It would be preferable for them to utilize food delivery services, or if there's neighbors or family that they have in the area that can deliver food rather than them going out. That's part of the order, part of the governor's orders as well.
Right. And I've also just in participating with on countless conference calls with the county and the state. When someone is tests positive for COVID-19, it's the responsibility, at least in our general area. Jersey Village doesn't have a health department. We don't have anybody who can really get in contact, trace, and that kind of thing. So it is the county health department. It is the county's sort of purview to get in touch with that person who's tested positive and give the recommendations on how to quarantine. They also try to get some information on where they've been, who they've come in contact with. Make sure that they contact their employer for excused absences, and provide any resources that can be made available to them, such as food delivery. If they're a person who cannot afford that, then they tend to recommend other services for that individual. Any other questions about this topic?
Yeah, I think this has kind of been touched over, but I want to make sure that this point is clear. Austin, if I'm reading this ordinance correctly, really what it primarily does, it just continues us in a state of emergency declaration. It refers back to the governor's order. So anything that can be done or can't be done is not based on our discretion. It's based on the governor's orders or the county judge's orders, to the degree that can differ from the governor's orders. I don't think it can, but and otherwise just provides for enforceability. Is that pretty accurate?
That's very accurate.
So if something's open or something's closed as a result of an order, it's going to be based on the state's actions or the county's actions.
And when it comes to businesses and those types of things, we could close municipally run parks or playgrounds or those types of things. But for
Correct.
businesses
Okay.
and those types of things, it would be the governor's order.
Got it.
And this ordinance also just continues a few different things that we've provided as a city, such as continuing water service, making sure that no one's water is cut off due to non-payment. It waives late fees on balances of water and wastewater bills, and waives processing and convenience fees for credit cards. So those are the main points. Everything else very much references the governor's orders. And I think that's pretty wise. So any other questions on this? Any other comments on this topic?
I was happy to see several of the changes, like Bobby mentioned. At one point, I think there was like a week there that ours was a little bit more restrictive than the state. I saw an email about Los Cucos having 57 people, whereas I think our ordinance really only allowed 50. It makes no sense for us to have more restriction. We're such a small part of a very big pond that I like this really just defers to the state, but allows us to continue having this state of emergency for all of the different reasons we need it.
I agree. Yeah, we're 8,000 people in a 7 million person ocean.
It's very well written.
All right. Any other questions, comments? If not, I'm looking for a motion on ordinance number 2020-11.
I'll move to approve ordinance number 2020-11.
Second.
Motion by Gary, seconded by James Singleton. Any more discussion on the topic? Seeing none, I'll do a roll call vote. Councilmember Wasson, you're muted. Never mind.
I'm unmuted.
Okay, Councilmember Wasson.
Aye.
State your vote. Aye. Councilmember Warren, state your vote.
Aye.
Councilmember Singleton, state your vote.
Aye.
Councilmember Womenhorse, state your vote.
Aye.
Councilmember Holden, state your vote.
Aye.
Motion passes. Oh, I just closed out my agenda. Hang on. All right, moving on to item number 2, consider resolution number 2020-22, authorizing the fire chief to apply for a grant through FEMA for staffing for adequate fire and emergency response, SAFER, and if approved and funded, authorizing the city manager to add 4 new firefighters into the fiscal year 2020-21 budget. Mark Bitts, Fire Chief.
Good evening. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, sir.
Great. Good evening, Mayor and Council. The agenda before you tonight is to apply for a SAFER grant for funding of personnel. SAFER means staffing for adequate firefighting and emergency response. The reason this is coming before you tonight instead of after our budget retreat is because this grant is open now and closes on the day that we actually meet for budget. In addition, a month ago, I received a phone call from Mayor Mitchum about our volunteer participation and our response. And after that discussion, Mayor Mitchum requested me to make sure I discussed volunteer staffing during the budget retreat. This agenda is the need for additional staff for manning our fire apparatus and the safety of all involved. The SAFER grant is an avenue to help fund people. We just don't have the perfect scenario of staffing for some of our responses day or night to manage all large fire apparatus. Jersey Village Fire Department has been a mostly volunteer fire department for the last 64 years. We currently have 37 volunteer members in the department. In 1992, we began adding part-time paid staff for daytime coverage. We have one on duty every day of the week during daytime hours. In 2010, we added one full-time captain position to satisfy the requirement of having a paramedic on duty 24 hours a day. At that time, we were short 12 days a month with no paramedic. In the last budget, we added 2 full-time firefighters on day shifts to cover a shortage of staffing from our part-time personnel. Over many years now, we've been making attempts to recruit volunteer firefighters into our department, and we've done that. We've added many new volunteers over the past several years. However, during this time, we have felt the reduction in volunteer response on many of our calls. There are many factors that contribute to the reduction of volunteer response. Some of those factors include younger firefighters not around as much as they used to be. We used to see our younger group staying at the station all the time and manning the apparatus ready for response. This no longer happens in part that they are now working in the industry and now not available. Another factor includes many of our current active responders are EMS only personnel, so they cannot get on the large fire trucks. And we do have an aging staff that Frank mentioned earlier who have slowed their response to some of these calls. When we look at call types that requires full response on fire apparatus and heavy rescue truck, these vehicles are not fully manned a majority of the time. I would love to see 4 people on each one of these trucks every time each one of these trucks responds to a call, day or night. We do not have the number of staff that would be ideal for full manning of these trucks. During the daytime, I can get 2 trucks with 3 people on them. Most days we have 6 people available to get at least 2 large trucks responding to a fire call or a call that requires large apparatus to roll. During the day, we average 1 volunteer who can respond to assist during the daytime hours. The National Fire Protection Association and OSHA standards say that we should have firefighters available outside the hazard areas ready to make rescue entry if a firefighter is in the hazard zone and they go down. OSHA standards say we should have 2 people outside for every 2 people inside. The National Fire Protection Association says we should have 7.5 people per 1,000 residents ready to respond to a call. That's 60 firefighters. This standard is unreachable to us. Between volunteer and paid staff, we can't meet this requirement at all. During the daytime hours, we have 1 captain, 2 full-time firefighters, and 1 part-time firefighter to respond to calls. In addition, the fire inspector and fire chief respond to calls as well. This totals 6 people during the day to respond. If we add the average 1 per day volunteer, this brings us to 7 staff that I've told you in past that is the very minimum for most calls, including a major accident. If we have a fire call during the day, we can get 3 people on 2 of our fire trucks as mentioned. With the fire inspector and me around to assist, our numbers are better, but still not what we should have during the day. That is why we encourage our volunteers around during the day to respond if they can. At night, our average response for volunteers is between 4 and 5, 4.33. With the captain's response as one person and the average of volunteers being 4 persons, that is 5 persons responding to a call. In years past, I have told you that on a major incident like a motor vehicle accident, we need 7 people at the very minimum. The last motor vehicle accident we responded to just this last Thursday night had 2 people on the rescue truck and 1 person on a fire truck. We also had the captain respond and the ambulance crew. That totaled 6 people who responded to the scene. It can be done with the amount of people as long as the motor vehicle accident is one that wouldn't overwhelm resources. Most of the time, the fire truck driving with 1 person is usually going to be a blocking truck. It is not ideal, and for safety reasons, we shouldn't do it. But sometimes that is all you have, and I understand that. It is the major accident with 3 vehicles and an entrapment that the 2 people on the rescue truck, the 1 person on the fire truck, will have difficulty with. Of course, we also have the ambulance crew coming, to which adds more people responding. But we are talking about manning the fire trucks and rescue truck, not the ambulance. EMS, we do not normally see any issues with response. A structure fire, we need 2 fire trucks and the rescue truck from JV to respond. Ideally, we need 12 personnel for those trucks. But if I speak of the minimum number of personnel that could respond, we could do that with 9 personnel, 3 per large apparatus. During a fire, we also have other departments coming to help us. Prior to 2020, those departments like Cy-Fair and Northwest Fire Department were also facing the same challenges with responses. Both departments have now started the process of hiring personnel to protect their communities. When you have a combination department, which means volunteer and paid personnel working together, the last thing any fire chief like myself wants to do is add more paid people. For sure, volunteers will take this personally, and many will think the goal here is to get rid of them. That is not our goal. The goal here is to add firefighters to help supplement staffing and provide more people to help our volunteers. The goal here is to give the volunteers 2 more people at night to respond with them. The goal here is to make sure fire trucks and the rescue truck have people on them when they need people. There is a need day and night for personnel. Our objective is to protect the community and do it safely. I think of Bryan, Texas, a few years back when they had 2 firefighters on the inside, and when something went wrong, one of them could not get out. During the rescue, 2 firefighters were burned in the process, and one of the rescuers and the person they were trying to rescue died when they could not get him out. They had 3 people on each truck and had multiple trucks on scene. Today, they mandate 4 personnel per truck. When I listened to this to the survivor's story with Frank Marr at that conference in Bryan, Texas, Frank and I heard what they were saying, and we have made it a priority to make changes to keep our staff safer. We want our staff, regardless of their pay status, to go home to see their families. We have made several changes on our apparatus for firefighter safety because the safety of our firefighters is our #1 goal. When we have minimal staff responding to calls and we cannot fill the large apparatus, we have a huge problem as it relates to the safety of staff and the protection of our community. The bottom line is this is a dangerous profession and firefighters risk a lot no matter how many people show up. Standards tell us what we should have and we try to follow them. When we don't, the safety factor for firefighters diminishes greatly and some could get hurt or even killed. This is why it is important for me to tell you we are not having enough firefighters and it is unsafe in our responses when it comes to the amount of personnel we are responding. Some may think 1 person on a fire truck is acceptable, but it is not. It's dangerous and no large fire truck should respond with 1 person. Unfortunately, this has to happen sometimes day or night because our staffing response numbers dictate it. This budget season, the discussion I had with the city manager about the upcoming budget added 4 full-time firefighters and 1 full-time fire inspector for the daytime to meet 2 objectives. Adding an additional fire inspector during the day would allow us to have an extra person for response, but also will allow for us to prepare for the increase in inspections the village center will bring and to add personnel on nights and weekends. That's the 2 objectives. That discussion yielded this discussion tonight, the 4 firefighters that would allow us to continue to maintain our current day response of 6 people plus 1 volunteer on average and add supplement 2 firefighters at nighttime to respond with our volunteers. If tonight's conversation proves the need exists, which I believe we have, I believe it's important to seek money from other revenue sources to help cover the cost. This grant provides 75% funding of personnel the first and second year, and then 35% funding the third and final year. After this, the city bears all the cost. I believe Frank Marr is still on this meeting. I don't see his name, but I believe he's still here if you have questions for him. Mayor Mitchum and councilors, I'm prepared to discuss and answer questions you may have at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Yes.
Any questions for Chief?
So there's a lot of information here. I look at this and I see a number of different topics of discussion. The first one obviously is, should we apply for the SAFER grant? That's the question being asked. Absolutely. There's no reason why we shouldn't. The SAFER grant is a fabulous program. I'm glad to see that we're applying for that program. The chief talked about the transition of adding some more paid personnel. I've seen this in a lot of different departments. I've seen the transformation from a fully volunteer department to a fully paid department. I've seen that go very well. I've seen that go extremely poorly. No matter where we go, well, what it's going to take is a team effort from the top. It takes some swift management of the situations and people that don't necessarily promote the team over a specific subsection of the group. And I've seen that on both sides of that. I absolutely agree with the chief. We need to communicate to the volunteers that this is nothing bad against them. They have served us faithfully for many years, a fabulous group of people in this city, and they are going to continue to exist and continue to be a vital, irreplaceable part of our fire protection solution. This does not replace the volunteers at all. He mentioned some different standards in there, some of those unreachable. We participate in part of the county MOU and have mutual aid. I think if you start to incorporate some of those numbers, you start to get closer to reaching that goal. At that same time, we can't lean on them to the extent we are currently, as of today, leaning on them to provide service. Chief is right. When you look at the number of people responding to fires, it's not enough. It is not enough at all. I know Chief, Leader, Wesley, Cole, Amy Ramon personally. All three of them would be happy to provide all the assistance that we need, but we can't rely on them to the extent that we are relying on them to provide the backup to our firefighters. We need to have more of our own firefighters of an age and training and capability of responding to our own incidents in the right numbers. So I'm absolutely for this grant. I want to see us apply for this. The closes in 4 days. I hope everything is ready to go that we can do that. Typically, we don't see the SAFER grant make any awards until the fall of this year. We're going to be in next year's budget by the time we get an answer on this. Austin's telling me no.
Yeah, Councilman, this one's going to be rather quick. In June, they'll make announcements and funding should become in July sometime.
Okay, fabulous. Fabulous. That makes it even better for us, because what I was going to say with that is once we have an award decision, we then need to have some serious discussions about funding of the fire department and how many people we need, whether this 4 is enough. And if we don't get them, we're going to have to look at some budget decisions, because we need this 4 regardless. I'm going to shut up now and let everybody else comment.
I appreciate that. Your insight is always valued when it comes to public safety. So Thank you for that. Any other council members would like to jump on, make a comment, have questions? Greg?
I agree with James. I won't reiterate any of what he said because he was right on target. I think as we look at the upcoming budget, we need to look at our long-range plans in terms of personnel and funding and get serious about making sure that good enough is not our standard. We need to exceed good enough. And Chief, you've done a lot with a little, and we need to give you more. We need to be staffed the way we need to be staffed for the citizens. Absolutely. So that's it.
Gary, comment? Gary, you're frozen. You have any questions?
I didn't hear you.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's obviously a very emotional issue for me. Question, the SAFER grant, is this a yearly thing? It comes around every year?
Yes, it does. It comes out every year.
Okay. Well, the reason I'm approaching it from this angle is we're obviously going to be looking at some serious budget issues with the pandemic going on. And you're calling for 4 people to be added. And I see your numbers and what you're talking about, but I mean, I'm wondering if we could pare that down to 2 and go for the other 2 the next year if we see a problem that is still there. And I have a lot of things going on in my head about this. One of them is just what happens with our assigned ambulance crews when you've got 4 people working or 3 or what, I don't know how you're even going to partition this up.
They stay assigned.
Yeah, but who responds? Does the
captain.
ambulance wait for them?
The ambulance will be there for the volunteers.
Okay, so the volunteers will still have the same responsibility.
That's the plan. The captain, it'll depend on the call. If it's a cardiac arrest, the captain and the 2 that are there will get in 18, start down the road, start CPR, Lucas device, and start getting things going while the volunteers come and get the ambulance like they normally would.
Okay. Well, that makes me feel better. And I hear you on your numbers and what is thought to be the right number of people, stuff like that. I've been involved in quite a few CPRs over the years, and I see how many resources we get coming in on the CPRs and how all hands are busy. But at the same time, I know that I've seen videos of it in training sessions and stuff, and 2 experienced people handling a CPR by themselves and doing an adequate job of it. So,
I'm sorry, did you say adequate or inadequate?
Adequate. They saved the life. And I'm not going to argue with you that we need firefighters. I'm 65 years old. I can still get in the bunker gear and do the job, but do I like doing it? I don't like getting into the bunker gear anymore. I'm gonna say that right now. But I mean, it is what it is. So yes, I have to support you on needing to get some people, but I would like to go through the budget session before we go for the total of 4. That's the only thing I'm putting on it.
Okay. Bobby, do you have any comments?
Yeah, it's moments like this that I appreciate the wealth of experience we have on council in addition to our professional staff, because it provides that additional sort of perspective. So I'm not even going to try to chime in on any of those logistics. I'm going to trust these guys on that knowledge. That said, I'll talk about the thing.
I am a professional, Bobby.
No, I mean, I'm talking about our city staff, but yes, you are a professional firefighter. But as far as the thing that I guess the thing that I can talk about that I think is important for me to kind of express is that, to me, the first things that we have to look at and the first things that we have to put on our list are police and fire. I wish we had a fire prevention fund that somehow we could draw from. The police department for a while now has had the benefit of that. We've seen it do wonders in terms of easing our budgeting process. Unfortunately, with fire, we don't have the same thing. But what that means is that at the end of the day, all of the other things that we would like to do in terms of capital improvements and all of that, that's secondary to the needs of the fire department and the police department. So in my mind, it's not like James said, the question of the grant. Yeah, we should try to go out there and get funding from all available sources before we dip into taxpayer funds. But if Chief made a very compelling case for why we need additional personnel, and I 100% support it, whether the grant comes or not. To me, that's the first thing we allocate, and whatever the shortfall is from there, we can cut out from other areas. We've got the benefit of the fact that capital expenditures can be delayed. Hiring additional help in our fire department where there's proven need, that can't be delayed.
Agreed. Drew, you have any comment?
I think everyone's stated positions pretty well. Public safety comes first, and then equal to that is the safety of those providing public safety. And I think that's where this comes in, is that it's, Chief Bitts raised a point that in some cases it's not as safe as it could be for the firefighters and the volunteers and the professionals that are responding to calls. So what we can do that's within reason to raise that and mitigate risk, I'm all for. And for the grant and for the full four that this provides, it's basically, it sounds like for the first 2 years, it's 4 for the price of 1. And then we have to figure out, after 3 years, how to pay for it full time. And I hope over 3 years, we've thought about that well and deep enough to make that happen.
I agree. I think everyone's commented. I'll give my thoughts. Having been on council for a while, I think this is something that every budget session, every budget workshop, every year, it comes to the question of staffing of police and fire. We always ask this question: do you have the people? And it's always been, yes, we do. But it's always been on the horizon that it's going to get to a point where we don't. And I think we've hit that point. And talking with Frank and talking with Chief Bitts and other firefighters as well, it's been on the horizon for a while. We got an email also from Curtis Haverty about it as well. And, firefighters these days, there's way more demand. It's a more demanding profession than it was 20, 30 years ago. They're basically now healthcare professionals that occasionally fight fires. So you have to get an EMT certification. You have to keep up with all your CEUs. It's not like back when I was in high school and I'm like, oh, I'm going to be a volunteer and just show up and they give me all my gear and that's it. And there's some training. It's a very, ask anybody who's gone through the process of becoming a volunteer firefighter. It's arduous and it takes time and it takes a long time, a lot of energy and effort to keep all your certifications and keep you where you need to be to stay safe and to provide the services possible. So yes, it's been on the horizon for a really long time, but I think we've reached it. And I think having the wealth of expertise in Chief Bitts and Gary Wilbenhorst and James Singleton and Curtis Haverty and Frank Marr and all these other firefighters who have said, yeah, it's there, it's time. But as James mentioned, this does not mean that we do not need volunteers. This continues to keep that volunteer effort alive, and it keeps it just as important. And we need to make sure that our volunteers understand that we still need them. We appreciate them. They are they're more dedicated than any group of people that I know in this city. They give up a lot of time, a lot of energy. I love hanging out with them when I get the chance. They are all professionals and that some of them fight fires with Houston Fire Department, some with Cy-Fair. A lot of them are full-time elsewhere, and then they volunteer for us. So their skill set is just as important and needs to continue. But in this day and age, people from my generation have a lot on their plates, and we've had issues with committees and boards, and heck, for city council, getting people to run for city council. It's just one of these big issues that we have these days, of people just not having the time or the energy or the bandwidth to really give back to the community. And so it's unfortunate, and this is one of the unfortunate side effects that we're going to run into as a city with our budget. Is it's going to take full-time paid personnel. But this grant that we're talking about tonight will help us ease into it a little easier. I understand the pressing time nature of this, which is why we're talking about it tonight instead of during our budget workshop like we normally do. So I don't have a vote in it, but my opinion kind of goes with everybody else's, which is definitely pursue this grant funding. And then during our budget workshop, we need to start talking about a more long-term strategy for making sure that we're all covered, we're all safe, we're all meeting not just good enough, but meeting, as Greg Holden said, not just good enough, but making sure that we're exceeding the standards, because our police and our fire, our EMS, they definitely rank top of my mind, top of many people's minds. And we have a history of kind of whatever you guys need, let us know, and you're letting us know that this is what you need, and I'm all for it. So with that, is there any other comments, questions for Chief Bitts?
I think 4 is an optimal grant application, but 4 is not enough.
Yeah, I think that's a great comment. I think we're gonna definitely need to talk about, and this is something that we talked about with the police department as well when we were talking about proper pay. We were talking about their resources that they need. And yeah, Bobby, great point. Wouldn't it be great if we could have a taxing district in sales tax, just like we have with the police department with CCPD? It would be great to have a fire protection half-cent sales tax fund to put into. That'd be great for a state rep maybe to think about putting forward coming up. But for now, we have to deal with this, and I think we're dealing with it in a smart way, which is going after grant funds. So any other comments, questions? All right, looking for a motion and a second on resolution number 2020-22.
I move that we approve resolution number 2020-22.
Second.
All right, a second by Drew Wasson. Motion by James Singleton. I will go through with a roll call vote. Councilmember Wasson, state your vote.
Aye.
Councilmember Warren, state your vote.
Aye.
Councilmember Singleton, state your vote.
Aye.
Councilmember Wobenhorst, state your vote.
Aye.
Councilmember Holden, state your vote.
Aye.
All right, motion passes. Move on to item number 3, consider ordinance number 2020-12, amending the code of ordinances of the city of Jersey Village at chapter 10, animals, article 1 in general, by adding a new section 10-6, keeping or harboring and owning poultry, providing a severability clause, providing for repeal, providing a penalty as provided in section 1-8 of the code, and providing an effective date. Councilmember James Singleton.
All right, after our last meeting, I went to the drawing board, reviewed some other city practices. I found more than 1,145 mentions of the word fowl in Texas cities using Muni code. There's a vast number of cities that prohibit poultry. There's a large number and a growing number that permit backyard chickens to varying levels of regulation. As we learned last meeting, the city of Houston's currently looking at an ordinance. I don't believe that outright prohibition is necessary, but we should have a well-tailored ordinance. I have to balance this with my belief of strong property owner rights. And there is a very matured and still growing practice of backyard chickens that have shown that chickens can be raised in a backyard with no impact to the immediate neighbor. And while there are stories of poorly constructed coops, disease, smells, and such, these are clearly the exception. I've worked with Chicken Mike, who called in last meeting to write this ordinance. His insight was very helpful. He builds and manages chicken coops throughout Houston, but some of his notable locations include the Heights, Upper Kirby, and River Oaks. My point in that is that even properties of sustained significant property value have chickens in their backyards. Now I want to look at the specific ordinance tonight. There is an immediate correction I need to make. Under section 10-2, subsection A, the term should not be poultry that's added, it should actually read chickens. After that, I found the single most efficient regulation to promote chicken health and reduce odor was to require a specific coop and run size. This is where we derive the minimum of 3 square feet per hen of a coop and 10 square feet per run per hen. This brings it to a total of 13 square foot per hen. The maximum size I chose was 130 square feet to allow the resident to double it if they wish to provide a best possible environment and reduce odors and problems that can come from having a coop that's too small. It's required to be sanitary and protected from predators. There's cities with more specific wording, but I found they often did a poor job of describing such and couldn't keep up with industry changes and improved materials or practices. So the language you see before you was chosen out of some of the best worded, general description, easily enforced. There was some concern for council about requiring food to be pest proof. There is a requirement for pest proof containers. You'll find the same setbacks from the last ordinance. Subsection E was written to alleviate tarps and other substandard materials. This requires wood or metals suitable for exterior construction. Obviously no roosters, removal of dead chickens. There was a concern on council to prohibit the killing of fowl on site. This doesn't seem to be a very big concern across the state. I had a very difficult time finding ordinances that specifically prohibited chicken butchering on site. There's some talk about general animals, but not specific to this. Chicken Mike actually recommended this also though, and so I've included a rule against killing your chickens on your property. This does prohibit free-range chickens that are required to be contained within the coop and run. And it requires the resident follow all applicable state laws as far as selling or giving eggs away. That is the ordinance before you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Councilman Singleton or comments about the ordinance? Go ahead.
I have some. On the definition of poultry, you changed that to chickens. I'm just wondering if you, I don't really know. Pruitt is here. Maybe he can answer whether it might be better to use the scientific term Gallus domesticus or whatever, but just to make sure there's no.
So that's not actually a definition. It's a general prohibition against raising, breeding, keeping animals and poultry. We currently have an ordinance that says no animals, livestock, or poultry of any kind shall be raised, bred, or kept in any other lot or parcels of land within the city. And then it provides an exception for your household cat and dog. The intent there was to provide the exception for chickens. There's not any other scientific names in any of the other areas of the ordinance. And the chickens was what many of the other ordinances used. Happy to get Justin's input on that, but that was where that came from.
My comment
on that would be just put chickens throughout the whole ordinance and keep it uniform, and then I think you'd be good.
Well, that works for me then. Okay, section 10(6) parentheses D. It's has to do with the distancing. I'd like to see something in there that prevents somebody from building the coop or the run up against their own structure. The reason being that, it was probably 20 years ago, at least already, more than that, 21, 22 years. we had a house fire on Rio Grande that was started by a heat lamp in a turkey pen behind the garage. The turkeys knocked the heat lamp over against the garage and caught the garage on fire. And, you know, maybe it's a very small chance that that could ever happen again, but I don't see why anybody would need to put their coop or their pen up against the structure.
If I may, I see Christian is there on the line, although he's muted. He actually, on an email that I was CC'd on, or I think we were all CC'd on, he did mention that there are some additional building codes that would apply to the construction. I wonder if he can kind of provide us a little bit of, to the degree he can recall off the top of his head, what additional restrictions would exist for the placement of a coop.
Primarily, what I'd mentioned was the floodplain development permit if it were in the floodplain. But to get back to what Gary's saying, it's extremely important that we not block a 7.5-foot setback along a side lot line, that people not install a coop up against their primary structure in particular, or an ancillary structure. It doesn't facilitate rescue operations. It's not safe for the firefighters. This comes up even with solar panel installations, so that firefighters have a safe area to go between panels and that there are clear areas for them to keep to adjacent to hips, valleys, and ridges. So with that in mind, I would prohibit the installation of coops, particularly along side lot lines where there's just a 7.5-foot setback or whatnot, and away from structures, which makes it difficult to maintain them. And I just think is not hygienic, not sanitary, and bothersome to other neighbors.
So Christian, could I build my shed within 3 feet of a lot line?
You can, but if there may be no opening penetrations within 5 feet of that lot line. Like,
so can we get a change? Or can we amend it to add this?
We could, but it may be too prohibitive. That's for council to discuss.
I think I kind of want to understand.
I'd like a 1 foot separation from a structure.
From the residential structure, from the owner's structure.
Or an ancillary structure.
Just to provide that gap in case, for example, if you were going over the heat lamp issue of an animal knocking over a heat lamp and causing a fire, therefore it wouldn't jump. It'd be harder for it to jump to the residential structure or a garage. So right now the ordinance says that the coop must be at least 12 feet from any residential dwelling or occupied building, except that of the owner of the hens.
Right.
So we're talking about potentially changing that section to say, to basically strike out that part that says except that of the owner of the hens, and change that to something 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, whatever you feel.
Since this all comes about from heat lamps, and particularly one 20 years ago, there's been significant improvement in heat lamps. And the code which regulates them. Mark or Christian, a heat lamp and an ancillary structure, would that have to be UL listed? Tilt. Mark, you're already nodding. You know what I'm talking about, but
should be. But
I'm not finding the right words. There are already requirements against this problem.
Yeah, they have to be UL listed. Probably the minimum is 5 feet, but heat lamps nowadays, and we could put that in there. It should be LED now. There's minimal voltage from that and heat from those. So, you could say if you want to put some kind of heat source in there, use that.
As we talk about these regulations and these LED lights, who's going to enforce this? Who's in charge of enforcing it? How do they enforce it? How do they enforce it? Do they have access to the backyard? Because, typically access outside of the public right of way is prohibited. So no matter what we put in here, tell me how we're going to enforce it.
To Greg's point, this is another issue that I had written down is, should there be a fee like there is with the dogs that would help pay for the person that's going to have to do the enforcing or the checking to see that the requirements are being met?
Gary, let me back up and have them answer that question first. Who enforces it? What right do they have to enter property to enforce a heat lamp, for instance?
Greg, you could do, I don't think there's a way we could go in there without you putting in an ordinance saying that once a year, this is going to get an inspection from the fire marshal's office or the code enforcement officer, something to that effect. Once they've built the structure and it's been approved by Christian, unless we've got serious complaint from somebody, we're not coming in.
Well, we don't have an improvement process in this ordinance. It tells you how you should construct it, but there's no enforcement to that to meet those regulations. Am I correct?
That's correct. And if it's not greater than 200 square feet, it doesn't require a building permit, so I won't be involved at all.
So we can write all we want, but the fact is we can't enforce it because we can't access the property to do it.
Unless you got a complaint based on odor, noise, or something else, which would also include numerous other issues you could have going on in your backyard, far greater than this concern.
Well, that's true, but this is what we're talking about now. So again, if you get a complaint, what are we authorized to do to investigate that complaint?
We request that the complainant make a complaint in court because the complainant is exposed to it, whereas we can't see it from the right of way.
So you can't simply call the city and say, hey, my neighbor's next door's got loud chickens. It smells, it's this. And you're going to tell them, go to court and file a complaint.
Yes, they can and they will call us.
I don't think that's a fair representation, Christian. If they were to file a complaint with the city, it would be on the city to investigate that complaint. And based on the complaint they made, the city can go get an administrative warrant from the municipal court and investigate that complaint.
Yeah, like what about, we do have ordinances about loud dogs, about the number of dogs that you're allowed to have, number of cats. If somebody has a large number of dogs beyond I think we are allowed 3.
Total.
Or
dogs and cats combined.
Goes with beehives. We're all allowed to have at least, I think the maximum was beehives in the backyard. What if someone has 4? What is the mechanism? Same mechanism for this ordinance would be the same for if someone had 4 or 5 or 6 dogs or 10 cats. What's their method would be the same method for this instance. If it's loud, if they're loud, if they're smelly, same thing for dogs. If the dogs are loud and they're smelling or not being maintained, what gives the city the right to investigate? Well, the neighbor makes a complaint and the city investigates, unless I'm wrong here.
Depending on the issue, I know I've requested entry. I know Gordon has requested entry. But to request entry for every complaint would be too much for our staff. And
how many complaints for dogs and cats and beehives does the city get?
That would be better left to Gordon.
Okay.
I'm not aware of any of complaints for beehives or that type of thing. We do get a few dog complaints on occasion, but not many.
Yeah, not enough complaints for people to know generally.
Right.
Let me just make a couple general comments. Obviously, you guys know that I'm certainly not in favor of living with, by, or around chickens in any manner. And I would venture to say that most of the people in Jersey Village feel the same way. I would venture to say that most would prefer not to live next to chickens than those that would. If I had a large backyard, or if I had a backyard and my neighbor placed that chicken coop closer to my house than his house, that would be an issue. And I think by this ordinance, you could technically do that. So it's kind of a transferring of a problem or an issue. I don't think that having chickens in Jersey Village is a benefit as a whole to Jersey Village. I would venture to say that most of us, if we were buying a home and it had chickens, it certainly wouldn't increase the value of the home we were purchasing. I would argue to the contrary. It would lessen that value. I know it would for me. If you had a chicken coop and you had a house for sale next to you, guess what? I'm not buying your house. So I think it's a net negative, period. I think we're passing an ordinance to pacify a few. And on top of that, I have a little bit of an issue with this process at the moment. In my opinion, I think there are a lot of people, a lot of citizens that have opinions on this and would like to provide input on the ordinance and are probably unable to do so because of the current online meeting format. I think that's prohibitive to a lot of people.
Their email's not working?
I'm sorry?
Their email's not working?
I got a lot of emails, yes, and my most recent ones, so if you look, I haven't had a chance to read them, but if you look at yours as well, most of them are negative.
There were
four. I'm sorry?
There were 4 this afternoon.
Okay, most recently, most of them, okay, most of them recently have been negative. So I think we're passing an ordinance to the detriment of the many for the benefit of the few. And I think that's a terrible way to do it. I think it's terrible to do it in this format without more public comment and giving citizens a more opportune time to present their information before council as a whole.
I will say, I remember at one time, if I may, I remember at one time there was a council member who said that democracy, and in particular here in Jersey Village, that it requires people to be proactive, and that if they are interested in providing input on an issue, that they don't need to be spoon-fed, that they need to reach out and to contact their council members. And we've had some who have.
Fine, you can attribute that to me, and I totally agree. But this is unusual circumstances. Having meetings like this, sitting in a den of a home, is not the same as the format that we've had. And I still agree with the comment that I made. This is unusual circumstances, and to say otherwise is disingenuous.
I'm not saying that these aren't unusual circumstances. What I'm saying is that the circumstances don't provide a substantial impediment over normal circumstances for people to be able to provide their input. You know, oftentimes our interactions with people on an issue are going to occur online, via email, by phone calls. And we've certainly been discussing this issue with people well before this started. This has been a conversation now for 4+ years, at least, since the first time the mayor brought this before council when he was a brand new council member. So I don't think we're talking about a thing that's just dropped out of the middle of nowhere.
Well, that's true.
Well,
but
let me finish, because
hold on.
Let me just finish just very shortly. I think ultimately, it's not, when we're talking about trying to placate a few, well, there are probably a few who have been breaking ordinances by having their chickens. There are many more who probably would consider raising hens if it was legal. They're respecting the law, and I appreciate that. For me, this is more of an issue of property rights. You know, we are not in the business of picking and choosing what people do with their property unless there is a compelling issue that needs to be addressed. And so to me, the question ultimately should be, is there a way for us to be able to allow people to raise hens on their property and to make reasonable regulation to mitigate against the negative effects it would have on their neighbors? And if the answer is yes, then I think we have an obligation, an ethical obligation to pursue that, and a constitutional obligation to pursue that. To simply rely on prohibition and punt and say, well, we'll just prohibit it and that's that, without at least, you know, making a careful examination of the question of how we can regulate it to allow it, I think that's punting.
I think if you apply the same argument to motorhomes, to commercial vehicles, to vehicles that aren't registered and current with their titles, you could apply that same standard. We don't allow those things.
Oh, so, we do. We allow, well, at least motorhomes. Motorhomes can be on residential properties so long as they have certain coverings. They're not visible from the outside. So we do allow for that.
Currently, I think that's grandfathered in. I don't think that's current. If you have an inoperable car.
No, the grandfather was allowing people to have it on the property and still visible, if I remember correctly. Maybe Lori can help since she typically deals with
That's
that.
correct.
What's correct, Christian? You can't have them as long as
You
they're,
can have an RV if you built a structure for it to obscure it.
all right, bad example.
No, it's a
Guys.
great example because you proved my point.
Hey, Bobby, Councilman, hey, Justin here. Why don't you guys stick to the chicken ordinance? So you can get
Well,
off
but this is
topic.
just an analogy. The issue, this is entirely germane to the question of chickens because there's a philosophical underpinning here. You only outright prohibit somebody doing something with their own property as a government when you cannot provide adequate, reasonable regulation to mitigate the negative effects on the neighbors. That's when you prohibit. Otherwise, you utilize your police power as a city to be able to regulate the activity.
And I would argue that chickens have a negative impact on neighbors.
That's not the
adjacent
question.
neighbors.
The
I'm
question
sorry?
is whether we can, by regulation, mitigate those impacts.
Not to the extent necessary.
I disagree, and I think there are a lot of cities who would disagree as well because they've been doing it and more doing it every
Right.
day.
A lot more that would not.
Back to the ordinance. We had a couple of mentions of changes that you would like to be included in the ordinance. One of those being a separation from the residential dwelling. Right now it says the coop must be at least 12 feet away from any residential dwelling or occupied building, except that of the owner of the hens. I think there was a proposal to eliminate that sentence, that the end of the sentence where it says except that of the owner of the hens. What that would do if you left it that way, sorry, my screen went to sleep, would mean that the coop would have to be 12 feet away from their owner's residence as well. So you may, if you wanted to keep that requirement for separation, but require separation, then you would need to add something 6 feet or whatever, whatever you feel is probably a good distance, or nothing at all.
My thought on that specific proposed change is that there are already building codes and standards in play that would provide for that. And we shouldn't arbitrarily just pick 6 feet or some other suggested number. And the way it currently reads, Christians should still be able to enforce current building codes and standards. The fire marshal could still enforce the fire code as it applies without the change. It wouldn't be overly punitive beyond the standards that already exist.
James, I haven't heard anything to that effect at all. If somebody wants to put a heating element in that coop and that coop is up against a building, there's the risk that it's going to catch that building on fire.
As
I will
that's
say this.
discussed, it has to be UL listed. They have come a long way, and we don't see those fires like we used to.
But and then also playing devil's advocate here, but couldn't somebody also build a structure for their outside dog against their residence and provide a heating element there? I mean, a lot of this, like my approach to a lot of this is you can basically do, well, all we're kind of trying to do here is allow the same things that we allow for our other pets, our dogs, our cats that are completely legal in Jersey Villas, but they're will be more highly regulated than those animals.
I don't think chickens are seen the same way as dogs and cats.
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is structurally, you're saying that if someone builds a coop up against a residence and puts a heating element in there and it's for hens, the same thing could happen for someone's dog. They could build a dog run up against their house. And if it's a cold night and they have a dog house in that dog run, they can put
I think a lot of people put their dogs in the house or in the garage on really cold nights. They don't do that with chickens.
It depends on how cold.
I don't know. I mean, it's just, I don't see that regulation being pertinent, because if you could do it
It's
for a
not
dog
hard
run,
to add a clause in there that says it has to be at least 1 or 2 foot away from any building.
I agree it's not hard. I don't know that it's necessary. I go back
It's
to
necessary to get my vote.
a lot of the thoughts of what Bobby said. I'm not the scholar that Bobby is, but I do agree with his
I'm not a scholar.
I do agree with his assessment. This is not about chickens to me. This is about the rights of the property owner. And this is a good start. It's a good ordinance that is a great starting place. I don't believe we're going to have any number of the issues that we're talking about, but 2 meetings to get this started and passed, if it passes tonight. If we start to see issues, we can easily add registration and fees. We can easily add changes that need to be made, or we can just get rid of chickens if it becomes such a problem that we decide that needs to be done. But backyard chickens is not a new thing. It wasn't a new thing when Andrew mentioned it in 2015. I lived next door to somebody on Juneau who had chickens in their backyard for 3 years before I knew. And I was in my backyard all the time. He had 4 of them, free range throughout, just loose in the backyard. Had no clue, because they're quiet and they don't cause the problems majority of the time that we're discussing here. So I think it's more of a property rights issue, and a lot of these concerns are probably not, don't outweigh what I think we need to allow the property owner to try. And if it becomes an issue, as Bobby said, we look at it again.
I'll say this. I'm in, just to make, before Drew says, just to make clear, I'm in no rush personally. To me, if there is a desire to focus on some issues and flesh out some language that will address some of the concerns, I think that there are some concerns here, such as what Gary mentioned, that are legitimate concerns regarding access along along the skirt of the house. If there needs to be a little bit of space, what I want to make sure that we don't do is that this turns into we passed a chicken ordinance, which has so many restrictions that there are a dozen lots in the entire city that could actually have chickens. It's a chicken ordinance that's there for show and doesn't allow anyone to do anything. So, but I am interested in making sure that we address reasonable concerns. And if that means that we need to postpone for another meeting in order to further flesh out those issues, that's fine by me, at least personally, in terms of a vote. But go ahead, Drew.
I mean, look, I just, before Drew, just to address Bobby's comment, I don't really want to spend another meeting on this. Personally, I think that the ordinance itself, again, we can come up with hypotheticals for just about any ordinance that we ever come up with. So, I mean, for me, I like it the way it is, but let me hear from Drew.
Yeah, and first, let me state, James, thank you for the work that you put into this. You can tell it just wasn't off the cuff, and you did a lot of research, and appreciate reaching out to Christian, or not Christian, well, Christian, and then also Chicken Mike and others. I had a question. My questions are about enforcement and the cost of the city. Do we have to do anything? And could we call, our chickens, where's the word? I missed the word in here. What's the definition of a household pet, right? Do we need to do anything? And we've spent an hour of council's time, plus all of James's time working into this, and all of our other time for research, talking about that. My question is, what problem are we trying to solve, if any? And then if we put up these regulations, somewhat to Bobby's point, how are we going to enforce them, right? And we've had some feedback from Christian and others. I don't think the calls in for chickens today are that voluminous, or else, Austin might be able to let us know if we've had a lot of those calls, or Gordon might be better at that. So the enforcement of this, I mean, I live in the floodplain or close right darn to it, and a lot of people in Jersey Village do. How do we enforce the floodplain development permit? It's just small and simple, but not even to mention all the other regulations on the coop and the outdoor and the non-free range and the food codifying. So that's my hesitation with all this. I thought I'd, without repeating things everybody else has said.
If I can ask,
yeah, go ahead.
Would, and this is something that I, you know, I was kind of 50-50 on, and I knew that if concerns were raised that this might address, I'd be open to it, to putting it out there. But, you know, I have no problem with a permit for something like this. If it's a difference between can't do it at all, or we're going to put in place some sort of a reasonable permit that covers, you know, maybe some of the actual cost of going in and inspecting and making sure that it actually meets the ordinance, and maybe doing spot checks at other times, something along those lines. I'm not sure exactly how that would work or what's common for that sort of thing, but at least enough to know, number one, who actually is building a chicken coop. Number two, is someone gone to look to see if it's meeting the requirements and it's safe. And then number three, just to ensure that as issues arise, that we're covering the actual regulatory cost of enforcing all of this. So I mean, I don't know, $30, $40 a year, whatever might be the actual cost. You know, I know that the dog and cat license is like $5 a year, but I understand it also doesn't carry the same sort of issues with the coop and all of that.
Right. I don't even know where to go with this.
Another issue, Andrew.
Yeah.
We want to protect people's property rights. We've got citizens that bought property in this city with their neighbors not having the ability to bring chickens in. Now, all of a sudden, we're changing things on them, and their neighbor's going to be able to put chickens next to them. What happened to their property rights?
Well, if someone moved in next door to me and they had chickens and they were loud and they were smelly, then I would report it to the city. And this ordinance provides the ability for someone to complain about the noise and the smell, and to make sure that person is following code. Now, just my personal anecdotal situation here on my street, there are at least 3 neighbors I'd say that I know have backyard hens, and I didn't know one of them had them until something happened and one of them flew up on their roof and we saw it from the street. And so I just personally, I have more issues with neighbors that have dogs that bark all the time. I have issues with stray cats that come into my backyard and kill squirrels and leave them at my back door. There's a lot of different things that happen with the animals that we allow, that we have the ability to remediate that. We have limits. You know, you have the right to raise bees in your backyard. I know there's several Jersey villagers who have beehives in their backyard. If I lived next door and I was allergic to bees, that would probably make me nervous. But we have restrictions in place on beehives, limiting it to 3, so that someone's not raising a bunch of bees to the point where it's just bees are all over the place. So I see everyone's perspective. When I brought this forward years ago, I did not know what was going to happen with this, but I like to do what I want on my property. I like to have my dog. I like to have my cat. I like to garden. I like to put in a pool if I want to put in a pool. I would like to build a fence, a gated in area for my dog if I decide I want an outdoor dog, or decides to, you know, if I adopt a dog that's not an indoor dog. A lot of these things, I shouldn't have to ask the government whether I'm allowed to do it or not. Now, if I have 10 dogs and they're all barking all the time, and it's bothering my neighbors and they smell because they're going to the bathroom everywhere, yeah. And that's why we have restrictions in our ordinances. You read our ordinances, we have restrictions on the number of dogs you can have, the number of cats you can have. It just seems a little arbitrary to me looking at everything, when you step back and you look at it all, it looks really arbitrary to me that we're restricting hens, which many of our neighbors have, and you don't even know it, but you know they have a dog. That's my thought on this. Is we
Well,
have.
what I heard from Christian a while
we
ago
came-
was that
hang on. We came from Jersey Village was a farm. Jersey Village was a ranch. Jersey Village has always maintained a little bit of our rural character, surrounded by 7 million people. And I like that about Jersey Village. And my generation, and maybe even the younger generation that's buying houses now, they find it quaint to be able to raise chickens, to homestead essentially on your property, but still be accessible to everything else. It just makes Jersey Village so great. Is the difference between us and Winchester Trails, Winchester Country, and Willowbridge is that we have police, we have fire, we have humongous lots, we have the ability, we have a little bit of a history, we have a little bit of a character. And so for me, the ability to, I actually have done the research. I'm not going to raise hens on my property, just my choice, but I would love the option to. I find it, if I was to sell my house and a young millennial was coming to buy my house and I said, oh, by the way, if you want to raise hens, you can do it. I would find the majority of that generation who's looking for homes right now more than likely finding that favorable. And I just don't see, I think this ordinance is the way it's written is perfectly fine. If I can do everything in this ordinance structurally for my dog, which I can build a run for my dog up against my house and put a heating element in it when it's cold outside. I can do that for my dog today. What's the difference when it comes to hens?
Or goats or sheep or cows or potbelly pigs or what else? Where do we stop?
Slippery slope argument.
I'm not, but the argument you're making is applicable to other types of animals as well.
I think I
agree. And my suggestion is perhaps we just move on, have a vote and get past this, because we're all talking in circles at this point.
And I would really rather make sure that we have, if there's a third vote out there, that a few of these changes can tip one way or another, let's have it out. I don't want to just cut this short so that we move on. I think people deserve to have this heard out.
I'd like an answer to what we were discussing a while ago. I don't think we got to the end of it. I think Christian was saying you'd have to go to court instead of the city being able to do the inspection or whatever. If you had a complaint about what your neighbor was doing, that you had to go to court with it instead of calling the city and getting an inspector to come out and take care of it. Like Gordon.
So isn't it sort of the same when it comes to a noisy dog or the number of dogs someone has or the number of cats someone has? It's the same thing. You have to have someone see it and make a complaint to the city. What that process would mirror, and if I understand this right, would mirror the same thing. It would.
I would agree with you, Andrew. That's what I would have thought, but I heard something different a while ago. I'd like to have the official answer.
I agree. I'd love to hear that.
Mayor, if I might interject here.
Yes.
It's been my experience since I've worked with the city that has been the case, that when there are complaints, that they are told to file their complaint with the municipal court, that is the enforcement mechanism. The problem with that is that many neighbors do not want to go on record saying that their neighbor complaining about them, because they're going to have to then appear in court and provide their testimony about the complaint, which would make them public, and they don't like that. So the enforcement,
neighbor against neighbor.
Right, and they don't want to do that. So oftentimes the reason why there aren't complaints that you hear of is because that neighbor doesn't want to file that complaint.
Christian, can you comment on just if someone were to complain about their neighbor's chicken coops being smelly or chickens being too loud, or violating this ordinance, what would that process look like if somebody were to want to?
We explain that they should file a complaint in court, and then they'll do exactly as Lori said, and we'll send a bluff letter. If it's a serious enough issue, I'll ask for access to the property. If it's more of a life safety issue or some type of hazardous issue. If I might, and I'm sorry for this council, if I might get off of that part of it and talk about this against the ordinances we already have in place for proximity for an ancillary structure to a primary structure. The minimum it can be within is 10 feet. It cannot be any closer. It has to be at least 10 feet apart.
So our code already
From what?
says it has to be 10 feet.
From a primary structure. That
Okay.
said, I've never applied it to an open patio cover, like a pergola or some type of patio cover that's not connected to the primary structure, because I didn't see that as the intent of the ordinance, that somebody could pass through an open patio cover. There aren't any walls. So
Right.
how do we want to make sure if this does pass that it doesn't conflict? If you have impediments in the way within 10 feet of a primary structure, is that a problem? Do I then need to rewrite the ordinances for other structures and talk about percentage of openings to determine how close something can be? Or do I get rid of it altogether? Because really, except for aesthetics, none of these requirements should be in the development code. They should remain the purview of the building code, and quite often they're coming at loggerheads.
Okay.
It sounds to me like an independent issue.
Yeah, so we're talking about the current code says that something that has walls basically needs to be at least 10 feet from the primary structure.
No, sir. It actually just states that all ancillary structures must be at least 10 feet from the primary structure. I just thought that was too onerous. If somebody wants to build a patio cover that doesn't attach to the primary structure and it's completely open, I'm like, okay, this is meant for a hobby structure, for a utility shed, for something that you might store hazardous materials in too close to the house.
Or a chicken coop.
Or a chicken coop that you might trip over. But maybe not. It depends on how it's constructed. I don't know how it's going to be constructed.
It's going to have 4 walls and a roof.
Yeah, smaller walls and a roof. I just was concerned about somebody taking an entire side setback between the house and the lot line of 7.5 feet and creating a run there with little fences and all kinds of impediments.
So
my original concern was just that a heating implement would be placed in a position where it could cause a fire hazard. And if dogs can do the same thing, I'd like it to apply to dogs too. But maybe we get the fire chief's opinion on this as what the proper distance should be. Is 1 foot enough, or is 2 foot enough? It's not very hard to add it to it. And it's not that restrictive a thing.
I think it should be at least 3 to 5
3 feet.
Yeah.
3 to 5 feet.
As it's written in the Code of Ordinances, it's 10 from the primary structure.
Unless it's a pergola.
Right.
Sorry, I'm going to pick on you a little bit.
I'm kind of looking at my house, and I have a very small house, one of the smallest houses in Jersey Village. 10 feet from my house, I still have a lot of yard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm fine with that.
I'm fine with it being 10 feet to comply with all of our other codes.
When we send the fire inspector to apartment complexes to look at things, it has to be minimum 10 feet away from the building.
I say
Right.
I say we do 10 feet.
Barbecue grills, combustible construction, 10 feet.
Well, it's pretty, that 12 feet from residential dwelling, I think.
It's not for single family, but.
Austin, I got that from you, but I think that 12 feet from any residential dwelling or occupied building was actually based on some other codes and standards. And a better adaption of this might be to, under subsection D, delete everything, comma, except that of the owner of the hens. So it's still the 12 feet that was there before. We meet that 10, but there's now another 2 because that 12 feet came from, I can't quote where it came from right now. Maybe Austin can. But.
Yeah, it was in the original ordinance, or the ordinance as introduced last month, which I believe was taken from the one that was introduced back in 2015. I don't know previous to that where that 12 feet came from.
That means I'm responsible.
Yeah, which means that we'll just do 10. That's fine. So subsection D, the last sentence would read, the coop must be at least 10 feet from any residential dwelling or occupied building, period.
Okay. Gary, does that satisfy what you were worried about, making sure there's separation between the primary residence and the structure?
More than adequate.
More than adequate. Okay.
All
All right.
I thought, Gary, I'm sorry to interrupt. I thought you'd said it was a detached garage that had caught fire.
It was a garage it's detached, but it's attached by a breezeway.
Okay, so that's.
And since a lot of
not
those
where the 10
breezeways
feet-
don't have their fire blocks in them, the fire goes into the house.
Which most do not, yes. We've had quite a few of those problems. So that's technically a detached garage, not an attached, and the 10 feet wouldn't apply there.
So we need something to provide some distance.
So
I believe the lights are better now, though, as to
yeah,
for
there's
James and others.
You can't guarantee what somebody's going to use to heat their chickens.
Right.
Or their dog, or their cat,
Or their dog inside the detached garage.
or their exotic snake. I am really starting to agree with Greg on this. We maybe a vote's just necessary.
I'm willing to. I'll grind it out. Let's go. Let's go.
I agree, but some of the things that we're talking about don't apply to chickens. They apply to every nuisance abatement issue on every property. I think we have found a significant issue of, I would like to provide great service to the residents. And if someone is coming in and complaining about their neighbor and providing some facts, not just their opinion or observation, but hey, here's the photo of my neighbor and there are 5 dogs in the backyard that aren't being cared for properly, that the city's not telling them, well, you're going to need to go to municipal court to get that handled. If there is some other route to handle that problem, it's unrelated to chickens.
Just to touch on that too, is years ago when I first got on council, there was an issue with someone had a swimming pool that was not taken care of, and there were just mosquitoes and all sorts of animals in it, and the neighbor wanted to complain, but was told that they would have to basically file a complaint with the court and have to be a witness. And so we could sort of work something out in discussing with Gordon and Mike Castor at the time of, this is a health and safety issue. The city should be allowed to become the witness at some point.
May I chime in on that one, Mayor,
yes.
when you're done?
Yeah, can you refresh my memory on that?
Well, that became my pet project.
Yes.
I sent a letter telling them that the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code at the time defined any pool as an aquatic vessel, and it no longer required it to have 24 inches of water. It could have half an inch of water and be an aquatic vessel. I just entirely bluffed. Our interim city manager at the time, it was after Mike, what was his name? He wanted me to go down there and stand and make sure it was taken care of immediately. I said, sir, you're taking me away from doing inspections at commercial pools and hotels. Let's get a fix or a real feel for what the real threat is. So yes, I had city crews, public works crews, once I got the public works director's permission, put up the orange construction fencing,
right,
secure the location. I wrote long letters. We paid hundreds of dollars with Leah at Olson & Olson to review my letters. We talked about mosquitoes, et cetera. It was entirely a bluff, and it was a lot of work. The pool was actually a pit. He was filling up, it used to be a pool, filling up with rubble and whatnot. And I thought the bullfrogs were doing a pretty good job with the mosquitoes, but we finally got it abated. It was really about him selling it to somebody else who might not know that there was fill put in that was going to sink at a later date, that it wasn't done and tamped properly.
Gotcha. Okay, so, you know, I'm trying to figure out our next steps, and I'm kind of thinking, we should.
Let me ask, Gary, do you feel like you're comfortable with this?
What I'm not comfortable with is the taking away of the negative impact on the people that have bought property in Jersey Village. You're violating their property rights.
What negative impact have we still not mitigated against with this ordinance?
They have got to go to court, neighbor against neighbor, in order to take care of any offensive thing that's going on with the chickens. It doesn't work, Bobby.
I'd be interested from hearing from our city attorney regarding whether the state law provides alternatives there.
I was going to ask Justin that question of is the city not able to get an administrative warrant to investigate a violation of code of ordinance on a property?
I mean, who is your code enforcement officer?
Gordon Gibson.
What does he do when he sees a fence that's dilapidated in somebody's backyard?
Sends a letter.
Austin.
Yeah,
It's the same thing that we'll do here. I mean, if you see, if you put whatever structure you're talking about in this, if we're talking about structures in your code like you're doing now, it's not going to go to municipal court like a dangerous dog bite or anything like that. You're talking about a structure or a violation of the code. If that's seen or reported, and your code enforcement officer can follow the same system that you do, send a letter to abate the problem. If a person has 10 chickens and they're supposed to have 6 or 5, then they have to abate that within a certain amount of time. If they don't, then it's subject to whatever enforcement you guys will do at the city. I mean, I think that if you want to make that clear, you can write it. I know you don't want to go back to this again, Mayor, but you could add a provision into this proposed ordinance that would spell that out exactly how, that would happen and under what system and all that. Because how it's written right now, your animal ordinance, it defines nuisance as noise, and then you have essentially dangerous dog issues. And those are all municipal court type issues. But if you wanted something that dealing with just to make sure people are sitting, within the limits of whatever you're going to put here, 5 or 6 chickens, then, I think another way to go about this is somebody said something about a permit. That's pretty easy to do, that you apply for a certain type of permit, and then, part of that permit could be the structure of the coop. It could be the specific allowance for them to have it, whatever number of chickens. You can address I know in here you talk about you can't, do commercial egg production. But one thing I don't see in the ordinance is what do you do with, hens lay the eggs and they hatch. What do you do with the little chicks? Do you have a system for that? And
there's no rooster. Unless you got a rooster that's going door to door.
The problem is there's still, when people buy the things, they're going to have, unless, if you've ever had chickens before, you know that sometimes those, even the professional type that say that you've sexed chickens out, they're not accurate. So then there's definitely potential for you to actually have roosters, and people that want to abide by whatever rule it is, they're going to have to get rid of that rooster somehow. And that has become an issue in a lot of cities that adopt these things, what to do. So anyway, just things to think about. If it were me, what I would do is I would structure this as a permit process, as a permit for chickens. And I do agree with Singleton, with Councilman Singleton, that where it's put in the ordinance. The only thing that I think about that is that the exception for dogs and cats, it qualifies those as household pets. And I think we've talked about that a little bit here. That is a chicken, a household pet. We don't know. I think for me, that's why it's easy to carve this out and say it's a permit issue only. Then the permit issue, then that puts it in your code enforcement officer to keep it in line. But I think that you could even do that as it's written now. It's just you have to interpret that instead of actually writing it in, which I think we could do if we took it off this this agenda, put it on the next month's agenda. We'd clear up all the stuff we're talking about.
So the best way would be a permit, but as it's currently written, it could be enforced by a code enforcement officer with a complaint.
I think you could do that, but again, that's assuming that the way that your code enforcement officer approaches things now. It sounds like what you're talking about with the dogs and cats, those especially dogs, tend to be more nuisance animal type things, and that's why they'd go to court. If you're talking about here, to me, the violations would be of the structure of the coop, and it would be the number of chickens. And so that to me doesn't seem to fall in the same kind of realm is a dangerous dog situation. You're talking about something that is just a straight code violation, which to me is a code enforcement officer can send a letter to them and tell them to abide by it, or then, they're going to, risk whatever the remedy is in the code, which part of it here, and again, it's not necessarily clearly addressed, but I think one part of your code as it's written now says that a licensed peace officer can come and take the animals. But again, that's, to me, generally, that's the context for dangerous dogs, not talking about, killer chickens or anything.
Yeah.
So,
James did put the self-defense provision in there for killing chickens.
That's right.
Why don't we decide if we're going to vote on this or postpone it? You know where I stand. Maybe we need to just get a consensus before we keep talking and talking and talking. Let's figure
I kind
out.
of want to hear Drew's position. Seems a little ambiguous at this point.
I think that there's a lot of chickens out there that we don't know about. Like Andrew said, 3 on his street. I could count countless many others. There's permits for dogs because they're known throughout every city to cause a problem. Drew?
Yeah, Drew, what are your thoughts?
Mine comes down to the enforcement of it. I just think it comes down to, are we solving a problem?
Yes.
Okay. And the other thing is, how do we go forth and enforce this to the degree that the law is written?
So if we can take this right in some permitting so that we can use the mechanism that Justin just described, you would be okay
No,
with that?
my thought is, I think we're creating extra work. We're not for an enforcement. I mean,
I guess what I'm and I apologize for interrupting. I think the point here is that ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm a yes. James is a yes. Is there a third vote out there? Gary's kind of turned this into an inverse property thing, so I'm going to assume he's just kind of a no at this point. Greg's made his case known that he's a no.
I'm a no. Just to cut that off.
Let's call. Why don't we make a motion and vote on it?
Oh man.
I
Okay.
got decided real fast.
At least you got past a second, right, Andrew?
Hey, I'm not a no unless we fail to, what I'm seeing is we're trying to solve a problem, like Bobby says, but we're creating a lot more problems in the process.
Okay, let's work on this, Gary. How do we solve those problems?
Well, you have to mitigate the negative impact on the neighbors.
Okay, let's go down those. What do we need to mitigate?
Okay, well, we don't want fire started in the house next door to them.
It sounds like we got that.
And obviously we've gotten emails just the past days that people are talking about the negative impacts of chickens.
Okay,
I mean, y'all are saying that you've had chickens next to you and you never noticed them, but one person's saying that he had a lot of negative impact from the chickens that were next to him. Is there that much difference in chickens?
There could be, or people. I think the difference is in the people, but how do we mitigate that?
Well, you're not going to like it, but before you're allowed to have chickens or get the permit for the chickens, you need to get permission from the neighbors. And if you can't get the permission, all you need is a privacy fence.
Okay, so as long as I have a privacy fence, so no one with chain link fences.
I would say that would be good enough.
In lieu of asking for permission.
You got a 6 foot height restriction on your coop. Privacy fences are 6 foot or higher.
Okay, so as long as it's 10 feet away from the occupied structures, and as long as they have a privacy fence, those are the 2 additions, and you would be a yes on this.
Well, you don't need the privacy fence if your neighbors are okay with the chickens.
Let's ignore that. Let's go with the privacy fence.
Be honest, Bobby, I don't think he's going to be a yes. We've had issue.
No, I
fixed issue.
No, if that's it.
Well, you're concerned about property rights.
Yes, I am.
Okay. Everybody that owns property has got their rights.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to step in here and look. I don't think we're going to have a consensus on this. And my personal opinion is we just let this one go for lack of emotion.
We'll take it up next year.
I was letting Bobby talk. I I'm gonna say this to Drew's comment is in talking with the city and my thoughts on permits have with dogs. And I don't see a point. I don't think we have anywhere near the issue we have with dogs with chickens. I don't think a permitting is really going to be profitable. So I don't think a big change is going to happen with that. If let's just put it to bed, and I'll make a motion that we make a motion to approve ordinance 2020-12.
I second that.
I have a motion and a second. Any more discussion on the topic? Seeing none, I'll do a roll call vote. Councilmember Wasson, state your vote.
Nay.
Councilmember Warren, state your vote.
Aye.
Councilmember Singleton, state your vote.
Aye.
Councilmember Wobenhorst, state your vote.
Nay.
Councilmember Holden, state your vote.
Nay.
Motion fails. I'm getting you all t-shirts.
Well, Chief Riggs doesn't have to come up with some kind of chicken chasing training for his officers.
I think if you tase a chicken, it, yeah. Anyways. All right.
Fried chicken.
Moving on to item number 4.
Challenge you to find a chicken.
Consider ordinance number 2020-13, receiving the draft capital improvements plan, future land use plan, and impact fee study report, and calling for a public hearing to discuss the proposed ordinance amending land use assumptions, the capital improvements plan, and impact fee. Harry Ward has been waiting for a long time to talk about this. Go ahead, Harry. You're muted, I think. There you go.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Yeah, so the idea of the impact fee is a required item every 5 years. We're at the 5-year mark. We've had Jones and Carter studying this now for several months. We have a draft report that has now shown the study and the results. I think the results are heading in a good direction. I don't think they're going to be too much different than they were in the past. And so if we can, I'd like to ask Alan to defend his report. It's Alan and Mike here.
Yes, let me bring Alan and Mike. Alan and Mike. Alan, can you hear us?
I can. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Thank you for having us. We enjoyed the conversation about chicken ordinance.
We all did.
It's nice of you to say that.
So here we have the draft report for the impact fee study, the capital improvements plan, and the future land use plan. All that is required per the Texas Local Government Code, Chapter 395. With these three things, all three of these things need to be put out for the public review, for public comment, and then a public notice will be set in June, and then a public hearing would be set for July for review and approval of these three items. So we have worked extensively with the city on creating the future land use plan, the capital improvements plan, and the impact fee study based on existing reports and studies that the city already has, based on existing conditions, and based on anticipated growth within the city limits and then within future ETJ. So what we did was we analyzed the existing system, looking at how many connections the city serves, single family, residential, commercial, how much water each type of connection uses, and then how much wastewater is returned per connection. We analyzed the water demands and the wastewater flows compared to the capacity that the city is able to serve, both on the water and the wastewater side. And then looked at what the 5-year and 10-year projections look like based on feedback from the city, types of land use that's anticipated to grow in the 5 and then in the 10-year time frame. We did not consider anything outside of the 10-year time frame. We then compared these projections on a capacity with compared to the capacity of what the city is able to serve, and look to see what future improvements are needed, both on a ability to serve future development, but also on a rehab side as well. Any deficiencies that maybe the city is currently seeing. So based on our report, it appears that the city has enough capacity to serve the 5 and 10-year development on a water and on the wastewater side. There is significant growth, obviously, as y'all are aware, for the Village Center, southwest of 290. And there are future projects that would need to be installed to help serve those areas. So the capital improvements plan was created to help serve those areas that are going to be anticipated to be developed, but also to help do some rehabilitation of existing facilities, whether they're sewer lines, manhole surveys, any kind of improvements at the water plant. The CIP was created both on the water and the wastewater side. And then from there, the impact fees were calculated. We converted all of the future demands into equivalent service units, which is the equivalent of a single family residential service. Looked at the potential projects that would be impact fee eligible. So only the projects that are for future growth are considered for impact fees, not necessarily any that are rehab that help improve existing customers. So looking at the 10-year, at the projects that are impact fee eligible, the anticipated equivalent service units, we were able to calculate the impact fees both on the water and the wastewater side. And the impact fees that we were able to calculate that came down to is about $3,044.93 on as a water impact fee and a wastewater impact fee, $1,518.40. That is using the 50% reduction for the Texas Local Government Code, Chapter 395. And so both of these impact fees are just slightly higher than what was calculated, and
You lose him?
during that is what we have.
Still there?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Alan, we couldn't hear you.
We couldn't hear that last part.
Okay, so the impact fees that we calculated is $3,044.93 per water service unit, and then $1,518.46 for a wastewater service unit.
Okay.
And then both of these impact fees per service unit are just slightly higher than what was calculated during the 2015 study.
Okay. All right. Any questions from council? So yeah, go ahead, Greg.
Just one real quick question. So a single residential home could expect to pay about $4,500 in impact fees for sewer and water. The 3,000 plus the 1,500.
For a brand new residential.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, and so if there was a commercial, I want to make sure I understand. So if there was a commercial unit and it had 3 equivalent service units, they would pay 3 times that 4,500.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? Okay, if not, I'm looking for a motion on ordinance number 2020-13.
I'll
I move
we
to approve ordinance number. Go ahead,
ahead.
Gary. Okay, I move to approve ordinance number 2020-13.
Second.
Okay, motion by Bobby, second by Gary. I have a motion and a second. Any more discussion on the topic? Seeing none, I'll do a roll call vote. Councilmember Councilmember Wasson, state your vote.
Aye.
Councilmember Warren, state your vote.
Aye.
Councilmember Singleton, state your vote.
Aye.
Councilmember Wobenhorst, state your vote.
Aye.
Councilmember Holden, state your vote.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you very much for sitting through all that for us.
Thank you.
All right. That'll bring us to mayor and council comments. I'll start with Drew Wasson. You have any comments you want to make?
Yeah, first, I want to thank all the citizens for their patience with COVID-19 and everything. And we're doing the best we can as a city. And I know we're coming together as a community with all this. To all the moms, happy Mother's Day. And property tax protest deadline is Friday. So you can go online and file your protest if you have reason to do so.
All right. Councilmember Warren.
Well, first, I wanted to thank my fellow members of council for indulging our debate on the on the chicken ordinance. And for anyone who's watching this who probably thinks, man, they really had it out. I always appreciate the fact that on occasion when we do have these sorts of debates, we can always go have a beer and all as well. So I want to thank y'all for that. But I also wanted to salute our own Parks and Recreation Director, Jason Alfaro, who I understand will be leaving us for the sunny plains of Victoria, Texas, to be closer to family. And so you will be missed. We have had, since I've been on council, the tremendous luck of having two very good directors of Parks and Recreation. And you have certainly come in and made an impact on our programs and our parks. And I will say that the next director, whenever we find them, because apparently that is a difficult position to fill, they have very big shoes to fill and very big expectations that you've raised the bar for. So thank you very much for your service.
Appreciate it, sir. Thank you.
James Singleton.
I agree with Bobby, Jason. You'll be missed. Appreciate your service. Christian, I noticed that the Motel 6 and the consent agenda might have a C of O by the end of the month. Very excited to see that project is moving forward and we've gained some compliance there. Really glad we were able to come to a mutual resolution there. So as Bobby said, the discussion today, I may not have gotten my ordinance, but I fully enjoyed the conversation. I think that the discussion was great. I think it really showed each member's values and the decision-making methodology that they use. I'm very happy to live in the city with so many people engaged in government. And so thank you. I want to say thank you to all the people that brought forward the SAFER grant application and the things that happened there. Look forward to supporting the volunteers as they continue to provide the most personal public safety in Harris County.
Thanks, sir. Councilmember Wobenhorst.
Yeah, since we might not have another chance at this with the social distancing and stuff, I want to congratulate Jason also and say thanks for the great service he's done for us. And I'm not going to hold it against you by going somewhere else. Again, COVID-19 is obviously on everybody's mind. And I was encouraged today. I went to the grocery store and I think I saw a total of 4 people that didn't have masks on. And I thought that was a lot better, a lot bigger improvement over the other times I've been there. So wearing the mask is catching on and it makes a difference. So I encourage everybody to follow the guidelines. It just makes sense. It's not a big deal.
I agree. All right, thanks, Gary. Councilmember Holden, you have anything for us?
Yeah, yes, I agree with Bobby and James. Spirited debate is fun. It breaks up the monotony of public
Impact
service.
fees.
What?
The monotony of impact fees.
Yes. It kind of makes public service fun because sometimes it isn't. But the other, I want to congratulate our staff and our city council. The COVID-19 crisis is impacting the country like nothing we've ever seen before. But Jersey Village is less impacted than any city I know. And it's because of good leadership on the part of the council and the mayor, good leadership from our staff every department is frugal with their money. They ask for what they need, not necessarily what they want or what they think they can get. And that's a tribute to you guys. I want to thank you for that. And it's so refreshing not to worry. The city of Jersey Village is in great financial shape. We have good council, we have good management. And at this time, there's nothing to worry about. There's a lot of cities that are going to fail long before Jersey Village. That's a tribute to all of us and to all of us as a team. Jason, thank you for your service to Jersey Village. I wish you the best of luck in your new job and your career advancements. It's exciting. And that's it.
All right. Thank you, Greg. Yeah, I think I put that in my newsletter that's going out to everybody was when we made the decisions that we've made prior to when I was on council and speaking with mayors who served before, the decisions that were made decades ago really put us in a position today to make it through this difficult time that other cities are going to really struggle with. And conservative fiscal management, the decision to use grant funds for a lot of our infrastructure projects, our success in going after grants, that speaks volumes of our city staff and speaks volumes of our leadership, both past and present. I went and got a haircut a couple days ago. It was time, and I noticed everyone in the place was wearing a mask. I was wearing a mask. It was not weird at all. I had my temperature taken when I walked in. It was nice to know I didn't have a fever. That was great. And so, if you turn off the news and turn off the media and you just follow what the CDC says, what our city is tweeting and recommending, what the county and the state is recommending, it's very easy stuff. Wash your hands, wear a mask when you're out in public, keep 6 feet between you and everybody else if you can. And if you're feeling sick, stay home. And I think that's stuff that we should be doing every flu season. So, yes, this COVID-19 is very difficult on our healthcare resources. It's always been a healthcare resource issue from the very beginning. It's not overwhelming our frontline healthcare workers and our fire department and EMS and everything. So I think we've done a very good job of doing that. And it's time to start heading back out into public carefully and safely. And you can do that by washing your hands, wearing a mask, all those things that are being recommended by sane, rational people, and not beaten over the head in the media. I enjoyed our conversation tonight. It flashed back to 2015 when I introduced this ordinance. Had a great time that night. It only lasted like 15 minutes. But spirited debates are always fun. There's too many times where it gets monotonous and we all agree on something going into it. So it's kind of funny going into this, knowing that we weren't all going to agree on this. And it also it wasn't just for naught. We exposed some issues potentially with our code enforcement process. We don't want neighbors to have to complain about noisy, smelly dogs. We don't want to have to complain about this guy has 7 beehives or whatever the complaint is. We don't want to put neighbors against neighbors. And that was something that when I got on council a few years ago, and I made code enforcement kind of a pillar of my campaign. That was we don't want to have neighbors filing lawsuits against neighbors. We want our code enforcement to be a pretty easy process, somewhat anonymous. And I think that may be something we want to look at again to make sure that if a neighbor does have an issue and they're not able to enjoy their property, like I want to enjoy my property, that they should have an avenue for filing those complaints and not have to pit themselves against a neighbor in court. That's very intimidating. It's intimidating to speak in front of people, let alone take your neighbor to court. Some awkward trips to the mailbox there. So maybe something we want to look at. Jason, thank you so much for your service as well. We've had a string of very good parks directors that have, and you did a very good job, especially with our events. I know new festivals, movies in the park, all that stuff came from lots of hard work and research, and we really appreciate your service. And yeah, if you ever need anything from us, let us know. I want to thank all the people who contacted us over the last couple of weeks with their concerns about various issues. It was great to get a call from Frank Marr. It was great to get an email from Curtis Haverty, and listening to these firefighters who have given their lives to our city and say, yeah, it's time to start looking at a long-term strategy for making sure that our fire department and public safety services are well taken care of. This is one of the core values that we talk about a lot. And so it was great to have this experienced people email us and call us. And, you know, when they say something, you listen up. And it's great to have that kind of resource in the community to just call me and say, hey, this is what's going on, and it's time for us to look into it. So other than that, again, keep washing your hands, social distance, wear a mask when you're out in public. Hopefully we can start having meetings in person again. But until then, shoot us emails and give us calls. That's why the beauty of living in a small town, you can do that. And everyone keep your chickens safe. Also, one more thing, as the mayor, I am offering holidays for seniors who are graduating this year and may or may not get a graduation ceremony, but they definitely missed out on prom and missed out on a proper goodbye to their fellow students. So I made a post that was shared with JV High School. The principal shared it. And if you're a senior, you're graduating from Jersey Village High School, or you live in Jersey Village and you're graduating from another high school, perhaps a private school, it's open to you as well. The information is on the city website, but I'm offering to proclaim a holiday for you. So you can have your own Jersey Village holiday. Not a lot of people can say that. You can put that on your resume. You already got a leg up on everybody else. So you'll actually get a certificate in the mail with my autograph on it, and I'm going to mail it to you, and you can frame it and say, tell your kids and tell your grandkids in the future that you had a holiday. So doesn't make up for missing, what probably would have been a great end to your long run of high school, but maybe it'll make up a little bit for it, put a smile on your face. So parents, friends, if you want to submit, I have 42 people that have asked for them so far. So there's a form on our website. Go ahead and fill it out, and I'll be happy to pick a holiday for you. Other than that, I think we're good to go. Thanks everybody for sticking around, and I'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Meeting adjourned.